Friends, it is time to reclaim autumn, okay? Because why is it always marketed as the season for just pumpkin spice lattes and white girlies watching Gilmore Girls and the thigh-high boots and the scarves? Listen, you know what else happens in autumn? Diwali. Boom. You know what else happens in autumn? Black History Month. Boom. You know what else happens in autumn? Other festivals that I'm probably not educated enough to name? Boom, alright? And so today I want to give you some book recommendations from my autumn TBR that center black and brown stories, maybe a little bit of queer stories in there as well, because you know what? We can have both. We can have those stories and a pumpkin spice latte, okay? Also, hey, if you're new here, I'm Priyanka, your queer brown bestie and spoken word poet who's out here trying to live my most nerdy and authentic life online and hopefully inspiring you to be your most nerdy and authentic self too along the way. So we're starting in the fantasy/romantasy category because I'm not a big fantasy reader and I need a little bit of romance to entice me to read a book that thick. And we are starting incredibly strong with a book on this list that I have actually read, which is Stealing Thunder by Alina Boyden. And this book is set in a fantasy version of the Mughal Empire, and we follow Razia Khan, who is a Hijra, which is a third gender basically in kind of South Asian culture, but for all intents and purposes she is a trans woman essentially. And she was originally a crown prince and she ran away from her home and was taken in by this community of Hijras who are dancers by day and thieves by night, and they steal from the nobility basically. And when she's doing one of these jobs, she meets Prince Arjun Agnivansha, who is actually investigating one of the thefts that she has committed. But we actually love Prince Agnivansha because he ends up falling for Razia and he doesn't treat her, you know, the same horrible way that everyone else does. And so obviously, tension, is he gonna find out that she is the thief? And oh my god, right, this is probably one of my favourite books of the year so far. I'm an incredibly slow reader, and I never read fantasy, and I zipped through this in like 7 days on holiday, so take what you will from that. Next we have We Shall Be Monsters by Tara Sim, which the premise alone, when I describe it, is so enticing. It is described as Frankenstein meets Indian mythology. Come on. The protagonist Kajal resurrects her sister Lysia because obviously she's like, girl, can't live without my sis. But when her soul is resurrected, Lazia basically turns into like a murderous booth, which in Hindi basically translates to like a ghost, but like a ghost who specifically has something in their soul that they need to sort out before they can move on. And Kajal gets sentenced to death for her sister's rampage. But then two strangers help Kajal escape on the condition that she then uses the same techniques that she used on her sister to resurrect the crown prince. Except when she resurrects the crown prince, turns out the person she resurrected wasn't actually the prince, and it's this guy named Tav, so she teams up with him to find the real crown prince and to stop her sister from going on even more of a #murderous rampage. Don't know why I said hashtag. And honestly, what drew me to this book more than anything was that cover. Look at that. If you don't want to have that in a print on your wall, then I'm sorry, we cannot be friends. I'm just kidding, we can be, of course. Let's move on to the next book, which is Darker by Four by June C.L. Tam, which came on my Instagram FYP with one premise and one premise alone that has enticed me to put this on here, okay? That if you loved K-pop Demon Hunters, you will love this book. And I was like, sign me up, okay? And when I read the plot for this, I was like, okay, this is literally K-pop Demon Hunters, because the protagonist is called Rui and she is an exorcist in training who wants to avenge her mother's deaths. And the spelling is literally one letter off. AREN is the other protagonist of the story and basically is the black sheep of their illustrious family. But there's an accident and Rui's powers are transferred to AREN and everything is upside down because Rui's obviously like, I can't avenge my mother now, and AREN is like, oh my god, I finally belong. But also because Rui doesn't have her powers, she can't exorcise any of the demons that are like running rampage in the city. Sound familiar? So obviously she has to team up with AREN and they have to go on an adventure full of dark twists and turns and a lot of mysterious gods and mysterious powers that they need to uncover to save the city. Which, hello, does this also not sound incredibly familiar? So hopefully it will live up to the hype and be a golden read. Okay, yeah, let's pretend I never said that. Let's move on. Next is When the Tides Held the Moon by Vanessa Vida Kelly, which, if you like mermen, this is the one for you. The book is set in 1910s New York, and we meet Benny Caldero, who is a Puerto Rican orphaned blacksmith. And he's been commissioned to create an ironwork tank that is going to go in Luna Park, which, if that means anything to you, great. To me, just another park. with a cool name. He later finds out the tank is for the commissioner's very weird new exhibition in the park, which is a live merman. But of course, he befriends this lovely merman Rio, and their friendship starts blossoming into a romance because hello, of course it does. And of course, Benny also knows that he needs to set Rio free, but not only will he be losing his soulmate, he will also be bankrupting his family, which stressful choices have to be made. And again, aesthetics, the illustrations in this book alone are one of the main reasons that I want to read it, because looking at this alone, I was like, my heart hurts already. Autumn is literally the perfect season for mythology, and obviously I am a huge ancient Greek mythology nerd, but you know what I said at the start of this video, right? It is time for some Indian mythology, alright? So, the next book in this list is The Legend of Manika by Kritika H. Rao. So interestingly enough, the story of Manika is an actual Indian mythology, or like Indian mythology story. One of those is correct. Which, to be fair, I also didn't know before I started researching this video. This book essentially brings that story to life and follows Manika, who is a celestial dancer, or kind of like a nymph type figure. And she's been trained her whole life to use her dance to seduce men. And so Kaushika, who is a powerful mortal, arrives on the scene, and he threatens the power of Lord Indra, who is like the king of the gods, essentially. She takes that chance and strikes a deal. If she can seduce this powerful mortal, then Lord Indra will grant her her freedom. But obviously, it's never that simple, is it? The war is looming in the background, and Manika has to decide if this powerful mortal who she's about to fall for is worth giving up her freedom. And it's actually so nice to see that like books like this are coming out and also becoming Sunday Times bestsellers, because, you know, I'm Indian. I had no idea that this story existed, because as with any mythology, stuff like this is so vast and unending that you're like, oh, where do I even begin? And that's what I feel like autumn is the perfect time for. We now move on to my favourite and a lot more easy to read category in my opinion, which is romance. And I've combined kind of contemporary and YA romance in here. So we are starting off with Best Hex Ever by Nadia El-Fassi, which has been on my TBR list for years. I was working at Penguin when it came out, and I still haven't read it. And also very refreshingly, it's actually set in London. And we follow Dina Whitlock, who is a kitchen witch, which also an amazing title, and she runs her own cafe. But of course she's been cursed with a hex that plagues her love life. But the soon-to-be love interest, Scott Mason, is returning to London after, you know, doing a hashtag gap year, travelling to find himself after a terrible breakup. And he is super excited to be the best man that he can be to his best friend's wedding. I don't know why I included best 3 times in this sentence. And as part of that, he meets Dina, who just so happens to be the maid of honour and the owner of his favourite cafe. They spend a spooky and steamy Halloween night together that involves a lot of tarot cards and like casting spells, but unfortunately our girl's still cursed, and obviously she knows that that's going to put Scott in danger. So how can she get rid of this curse, and is she gonna tell him? Now, as I said, I am not opposed to a good pumpkin spice latte or two, and the next book I think has literally been described as like a pumpkin spice latte hug in a book. So here you go, obligatory PSL PSA. And the book is The Fall of Whit Rivera by Crystal Maldonado. So 17-year-old Whitney, who is a plus-size Puerto Rican girl and is also incredibly type A, which hashtag relatable, is forced to plan the fall formal, which is a mouthful, with her ex, Zay. They used to date, but according to the blurb, she got dumped in a terribly spectacular way. So obviously the question is, can they reconcile their relationship? And as well as plus size representation here, this book also has PCOS representation, which is actually something that we don't talk about enough and personally affects me. So we love to see it. I am so excited for this next book because it has also been on my TBR for years, which is A Holly Jolly Diwali by Sonia Lally. So switching gears a bit, this is an adult romance and we follow 29-year-old Nikki, who is a data analyst who secretly loves music and the arts, but she's always made practical choices and has gone for a very practical job because, you know, hashtag brown girl trauma. But then when she gets fired, she's like, okay, well, fuck it, let me make a spontaneous decision, and books a last-minute flight to her friend Divya's wedding in Mumbai. And she arrives in Mumbai just at the start of Diwali. And there, she also meets Samir, who is a London musician. And honestly, this has everything in it that I feel like I need this autumn, okay? It's a wedding romance. It's a Diwali romance. It's an artsy romance. It's a brown girl trauma romance. The 4 ingredients that every good brown story needs. And finally, for this section, we have By the Book by Jasmine Galori, which is a Beauty and the Beast modern retelling, because I feel like autumn is also the perfect time for fairy tales. And honestly, when I read the premise for this, I was like, this is hilarious. Not really, but it kind of is, because it is the life that most of my friends are living. So Isabel's the only black employee at her publishing company, and she's 25, still living at home, and is still an editorial assistant. Just publishing things. So when she finds out there is a rather annoying author called Bo Towers who hasn't delivered on his long-awaited manuscript, she jumps at the opportunity because she's like, girl, this could get me my promotion. Little does she know, publishing doesn't work that way. But obviously she meets Bo, and turns out he isn't just another annoying celebrity writing a memoir. He might be just as lost as her, and maybe there's something there that wasn't there before. Okay, so with poetry, this is the section that is the exception. That was not an intentional rhyme. Look at me, I'm a poet and I didn't know it. Because I have in fact read all of these books, so this isn't a TBR. This is Brown Girl approved poetry books direct to your device that you're watching this on. So coming in strong, we have A Recipe for Sorcery by Vanessa Kasule, which I feel like from the title alone, you can tell why I chose to put this book in an autumn recommendations video. The dividers, or like chapters of this book, are split into a recipe for blanks. We've got a recipe for release, a recipe for retreat, and that kind of thematic vibe goes on throughout the book. And Vanessa Kasule's writing is just so funny and like accessible and down to earth. This genuinely feels like a warm mug of soup in a book, and like a hug, but then also someone slapping you across the face being like, girl, get your shit together, you know what I mean? And honestly, I have recommended this book at least a dozen times on my channel, and I will not stop recommending it. Go read it. Next we have Motherline by Ankita Saxena, and Ankita is actually one of my like poetry friends, or like poetry mutuals, but that's not the reason why I'm recommending you this book. It's because it's just a fucking amazing book of poetry. So the concept of Motherline and the story behind the title is oftentimes, especially in like brown culture, we often talk about the father line of the family, but we never really talk about the mother line. And so this collection is not only tracing like women-led stories from Ankita's personal life, but also just in like brown culture as well. And I think in a season where you're more likely to be slowing down and doing some like thinking and reflecting, as I said, maybe celebrating some of those festivals or calendar moments at the start as well, this is a book that will line up perfectly with your plans. And also, even if it doesn't, that cover alone is perfect for your autumn aesthetic. Look at that. Now, if you've been here before, you know about my unending love for Phil K. I will never stop recommending this book or his poetry to people. I feel like a lot of that autumn vibe is like gathering round a campfire, and I'm so tempted to say singing that campfire song, but no, it is about like coming together and, you know, slowing down and like reflecting on change and like, you know, looking towards the end of the year, maybe also looking back at the start of the year. And this collection, Date and Time, kind of plays around with the concept of time. It has 3 sections that it's divided into, which is beginning, middle, and end. And throughout each of those sections, Phil K shows us like stories from his own life. And like, to give you an example, one of my favorite poems of his in his storytelling style is where he uses the metaphor of a ballroom to talk about his grandma's dementia, and the title of the poem is My Grandmother's Ballroom, and it is it's so good. If They Come For Us by Fatima Asghar, I feel like would pair perfectly as your next read after Motherline. It obviously touches on kind of female empowerment and feminism as themes, but it also talks a lot about like bodies and like textural components as well, which to me also just like screams autumn, because you know, we got our jumpers, you got your pumpkin spice latte, you got walking through the crunchy leaves. There's a lot of textures in autumn. And I think particularly in a season where you're slowing down, as I said, you're reflecting, it is the perfect time to enjoy a collection like this, because there's literally poems in here that are like in the form of a bingo card or in the form of a crossword, which is amazing when you're trying to talk about something as deep as like feminism, and particularly intersectional feminism. And finally for this section, we have The Girl and the Goddess by Nikita Gill, which is actually a novel in verse. And in it we follow Paro, who is moving from the transition of like childhood to teenagehood, and she's kind of trying to figure out how she can make that transition while looking at the way partition especially has affected her life and her family. But as you could probably tell from the title alone, there is a lot of elements of Hindu spiritualism in there. So it also plays with the idea of like the protector, the destroyer, and the creator, which is like the three key parts of Hinduism. And autumn is the perfect season for this because hello, not only is it Diwali, but also there is a lot of, you know, nature naturally destroying things, but then with the view to bring it back. And so I feel like it really nicely ties into those themes of the season. And finally, we are moving on to the graphic novels / manga section. First up, we have The Tea Dragon Society by Kay O'Neill. And oh my god, it just looks like the most wholesome as fuck book ever, because we follow Greta, who is a blacksmith's apprentice, and she adopts a tea dragon after finding one abandoned in the local marketplace, and she learns how to care for them through 2 tea shop owners, and then also along the way befriends this very shy, quiet girl called Mignette, and the whole story is just about friendship and love and looking after these tea dragons, which, if you need cozy vibes this autumn, this looks like it'll be for you. Next we have Mooncakes by Jomet Gill and Suzanne Walker. So this is more in the YA category because the protagonist Nova Huang is a teen and she helps out at her grandma's bookstore that loans out spells and other magic bits that help uncover mysteries in her small town, and she's of course also a witch herself. And she starts investigating one of these mysteries, and as part of the investigation she follows a wolf at night into the forest, which I'm also like, girl, are you dumb? Why would you do that? Luckily, the wolf turns out to be Tam Lang, who is actually her childhood crush, but unfortunately has not had a place to call home for a little while, so they turn to Nova and ask for help. Nova, of course, agrees to help them, and, you know, her feelings start to resurge, and the question is, what's gonna happen between them? The Magic Fish by Trung Le Nguyen is actually a book that I have a copy of, and I have actually read it, and it is absolutely gorgeous. The story is focused on T, who is a young Vietnamese boy who is struggling to tell his parents that he is gay and come out to them because his parents only speak Vietnamese and no English. And so he goes to his local library and starts to read fairy tales to help him navigate this journey. And I believe it is also semi-autobiographical, which I feel like makes this an even more heartwarming, bittersweet story. And as I said, guys, autumn is the season for fairy tales and mythology. Add it to your TBR. Now, I genuinely feel like it would be criminal of me to have an autumn TBR video that didn't feature at least one book or one more book that was set in a bookstore, which is why I have added the Saviour's Book Cafe in Another World on here. Also, I'm aware that like manga doesn't necessarily center like black and brown stories, but it still feels alternative enough to be on here, right? Yeah, you get me. Alright, let me tell you about the book. So Tsukina, who is a single 30-something normal woman living in Japan, gets transported by this godlike orb to another medieval world called Othel. And she's been transported there to act as the savior of that land. And with the magic that she's been provided, she opens up her own little bookstore in the middle of nowhere, which sounds like a dream, and a handsome knight called Il visits her very often to get away from the troubles of his own life, because, as I said, it's never that simple with these kinds of things. Because as it turns out, there is a bunch of problems in Othel that the godlike orb who transported her there has not told her anything about, and she needs to figure out how to solve them. And this is actually one of the other books on this list that I have read. Be warned if you're a fast reader, it is only 5 books long, which in manga basically means that you will only be able to read this for about 4 hours. And finally, we have The Invisible Man and His Soon-to-Be Wife. So autumn is also the start of Disability History Month, if you didn't know, and I thought this would fit perfectly if you like to theme your reading around those moments. So this is a supernatural love story between Yako Shizuka, who is an assistant, why did I say it like that? Who is an assistant at a detective agency. And her gentlemanly boss, Tonome, is invisible, but he is determined to get her to date him and is not above using his detective tricks to make that happen. But I feel like the sweetest part of all of this is that Shizuka is actually blind, and obviously the metaphor here, not even metaphor, the obvious through line here is that she is blind so she can see him for who he really is, which is so cute. And so that is my autumn recs / TBR. If you're still looking for even more diverse romance recs to add to your TBR, either for autumn or just because you're like, I need them now, you can check out my video here. That is my ultimate list of diverse romance reading recs. And thank you so much for watching all the way to the end of this video. If you did, please leave a comment below letting me know if you're going to read any of these books. Do any of these sound interesting to you? What's on your autumn TBR? Let's chat. And as always, I hope you're having a lovely day, living your best nerdy and authentic life, and I will see you over there in the next video. Bye!